this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Wherever you find us, whether it's a video or podcast on your favorite platform, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. You can also find us on major social media platforms. If you go to miamighostchronicles.com, you can find links to the videos or MP3 files, which you can download and enjoy without commercial interruptions. If you're into classic horror, ghost, and adventure stories, I narrate Nightshade Diary, and you can find links at nightshadediary.com. If scary stories are your bag, and listening to encounters with cryptids, ghosts, dogmen, and other weird creatures sends a shiver up your spine, then go to supernaturalstorytime.com for links to our weekly podcasts. Noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy stories, and anything that is just plain weird can be found at eerie.news or visit the Stranger Than Fiction Stories tab at miamighostchronicles.com. Please subscribe to my newsletter on Substack. Just go to mppelliser.com for a link. I want to thank you for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful. Hi, how's everybody doing? Good? Everything is good here. You know, from my last show, you remember it was a couple of days right after Milton kind of like thankfully crossed the path down south of me across Florida. And at that time I was on generator. All my power's been restored. We spent 3 days without power. Well, no, I take that back. There was no power since I had a generator because I've learned from past experiences. But yeah, the area, and I know there's certain sections in Florida that are still without power, but they're coming back. You know, a lot of flooding and a lot of stuff. And again, I'm going to do like the progressive commercial thing. I'm going to talk about the weather because, like I said, I grew up in South Florida. Hurricanes to me are not, you know, they've always been around, but now they're like, and I think what's calling my attention to it is because my birth has always been in October. Well, it's always been in October, but my point is that in your mind, you always think, okay, in my birthday month, I don't remember going through any hurricane watch even, you know, like watching. And now, of course, since we're fresh out of Harleen and Milton, they've got a couple of spots out there. And normally I would have paid attention to them, not giving them a thought. It'd be like, and now I'm like, oh God. And I think part of it is because I'm a little bit like, what's going on with the weather that it's October, we're coming up on Halloween, and we've got hurricanes, or not even hurricanes, disturbed weather. You know, they give a percentage that they could develop into something, maybe. Besides the fact of the one that, like Milton, the other one that developed out there off the Yucatan Peninsula versus off the coast of Africa. It's like, okay, either I'm getting paranoid or very, very weird. Like I said, I've grown up my entire life with the hurricane season. And you always connected hurricane, especially the worst ones, summer. The hot summer was the time that you had to be careful as far as the hurricanes that could do damage. You know, there was always the ones that, you know, missed us or they went off or they just fizzled out. Yeah. But, yeah. And, you know, I feel for those people up in the Carolinas and Tennessee and Georgia that they're like totally cut off left field because, yeah. And I went through Andrew back in 92, which came in a little bit further south than what they expected. And again, but that was back then, that was like a miscalculation, which is, you know, I understand that. But yeah, it's really funny because, like I said, normally I wouldn't have given those two disturbances out in the whatever. And I want to say, even now, and I know everybody is like, all these little weather channels, which by the way, these meteorologists sometimes are pretty good because they kind of give you a little bit more insight than like the local news network. You know, I have to laugh because sometimes they'll put these titles on them like severe disturbance out there, and I'm like, what's severe? And it's when you look at it, it's like, oh, you know, could be, you know, one of those deals. But yeah, it's like one of those. It everything changes. I mean, and how can I say this? Because I've lived through it. You know, after the first couple of weeks that the stories, you know, the fade away, and you know, there's still people out there. The level of, how's this? not only of destruction, but how it turns everybody's life upside down. That the people, after all the news doesn't, print a, well, they don't print anything now, but publishes anything about them, or the news reporters are gone, and maybe only it's local people that are helping out. You're still profoundly affected by it. And when I see these people without a house, I'm like, been there, done that. Believe me, it's not pleasant. And and again, people don't realize even if you try to get, let's say, an apartment, guess what? All if and this is a big if, even if there is any type of apartment buildings or anything, they're all booked. They're booked. You'll have to go out further and further and further to try to find a place to live while you figure things out. And this is, of course, if your house is habitable. So yeah, I mean, when I look at them, I'm like, oh. But again, my point of interest in all of this is like the timing on these storms is like very weird. So speaketh a person with a lot of experience in this. So there's my progressive. Let me talk about the weather moment that the commercial always says. They try to break the younger people about. But yeah, and the reason why I say this is, unfortunately, this subject could be life changing, for lack of a better word. I'm not trying to be over exaggerate, but it can turn into something along those lines as far as the trajectory of your life, your family's life, and God knows, even now, many years later, there was always a rumor, unconfirmed, of course, that there was more dead in Hurricane Andrew, bodies that were never recovered, than that what the actual death count was, because some bodies were never, especially remember, especially in '92, Homestead was a very agricultural area, rural agricultural. Same thing, I think that's happening in a lot of these places. There's going to be people missing that. Unfortunately, I don't think they might ever recover the remains. So let's see. And here we go. What can I say? And pretty soon we'll, hopefully, I'm hoping at this point that November 27th will truly be the last of the hurricane season. But anyway, let's get on to the good part. The good part is who is a guest tonight on Stories of the Supernatural. This is the first time he's here. His name is Troy Anderson. He's a Pulitzer Prize-nominated investigative journalist and co-author of the bestsellers The Babylon Code, Apocalypse, but it's Trumpocalypse, okay, and The Military Guide to Armageddon. He's the vice president and COO of Battle Ready Ministries. He lives with his family in Irvine, California, and he has a new book called The Trump Code, which has some extremely interesting time travel aspects to it. And I'm dying to ask him about this. I have so many, I mean, the whole thing, but, well, let me bring him on. How are you doing today, Troy?
Oh, I'm very good. It's an honor to be on your show.
On the contrary, it's my pleasure. Um, Let me ask you. I'm gonna. How did you get involved in this type? Did you always do investigative journalists in this field, or was it some experience you had?
Yeah, I guess it all began when a little kid. My grandmother, Trella Hope Schiller, she's a descendant of Ode to Joy poet and playwright Frederick von Schiller. He wrote the poem that Beethoven set to music in the Ninth Symphony and a number of
Okay.
famous plays. And so she would always just spend hours and hours talking to me about Schiller, encouraged me to become a writer, follow in his footsteps. So I eventually did, and became a journalist. Went to the University of Oregon, worked in newspapers for 20 years, Los Angeles Daily News for many years. In the last 15 years or so, I've been writing books. Books that didn't,
Okay.
I'm an investigative journalist. I've been investigating, biblical prophecies and secret societies and all kinds of intriguing topics. And that's now led to this Trump Code. One of my, I used to be editor of Charisma magazine. They came to me and asked me to write this book a few months ago about all kinds of intriguing subjects surrounding President Trump.
Let me ask you something real quick, and this is just a segue. I definitely want to ask you, especially about what you were talking about, this last book that you released, because I'm sure you've heard of it. Do you think there is such a possibility of weather manipulation besides seeding clouds?
After these recent hurricanes are so devastating. A friend of mine lives in Venice with his wife, and they'd actually I encouraged him to to get out of that area because the hurricane was going to hit there.
Mm-hmm.
And so they went to West Palm Beach, and then all of a sudden my wife said, "Troy, call Kevin and pray for him." And so I called him, and he said, "There's tornadoes all over the place." And so I prayed for him, and then the next thing I got was a text message. He was saying that cars were flying through the air, and parts of houses were breaking off, and people were dying, and it, apparently where they were staying, they were okay, but it just sounded like a terrible situation. So you wonder, and we just we've got this pivotal election coming up. We've seen
Yes.
this all-out attack on President Trump for years now. There's things that if you could just do a simple search of the internet, the government does have these kind of technologies, and so could this been used? We don't know, but
Right.
I'm sure it's a question on many people's minds now because of this upcoming election and
The
some of
timing on it is very suspicious.
timing, and then a lot of the areas that got hit are heavily Republican areas, so we don't know for sure, but it's I'm sure it's a lot of people are wondering.
Well, yeah. As a matter of fact, earlier today I spoke to my cousin who knows a pastor out in Venice Beach, and they have a church. They were saying that a lot of the people that were attendees, they were just picking up and leaving. They're moving out. Everything got so badly damaged that at this point they're like, "Hey, we're not. Besides, we don't even feel comfortable rebuilding here. We're just gonna like take our things and just go to some place where, you know, no, whether it's the threat of hurricanes or whatever. But yeah, the damage was so severe, and we had like one hurricane right after the other. So a lot of these places on the coast really were hit. We have an since I'm in Florida, close to where I'm at, there's a Cedar Key west of me that I've heard from people, like even like restaurants, stuff that was on the water. They're gone. There's not even anything to like rebuild. It's like they swept the ground there. And of course, even the locals that sometimes make a living from working in any of these mom and pop places, there's no place for them to get employment. So it's almost like a way of clearing out people that live in certain places, besides the disruption as far as the ability, let's say, to go, vote or whatever, that again evaporates because of that. Plus, if you're worried, houses sometimes if you're worried, am I gonna have a roof over my head? You might not be available, to, go to the, go vote, or the place you would normally go to is not there. There's places like local churches and, just places that they'll designate for voting purposes, and those are gone as well. It's a very crazy situation. It really, really is. And I think that most people, how's this, have a hard time believing that something as manipulative as that is possible or would be employed. How's that? Because it's disturbing when you think of it. You really, really think. One thing is to seed clouds so that it'll rain, maybe if there's a drought, but something along these lines, it makes it opens the door to many other things that most people, most Americans don't want to think. Oh, what else is there that has been maybe used against us or could be used against us? That big question mark. I think that's unfortunate. I think in the last couple of years, maybe since like 2020, a lot of people have had to have what they call it, that black pill moment, and they keep coming. The black pills keep coming, and yeah, I think that unfortunately we find ourselves in that quandary. Um, Let me ask you, in this, when did you release this last book that just came out? Was it this year?
Yeah. The Trump Code just came out on September 17th, and hit number
Mm-hmm.
one bestseller on Amazon, and then the
Okay.
Audible book just came out.
Okay. 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 Now, because you had an earlier book that had to do with Trump, all right. Let me ask you, the first one that you released, the Babylon Code. What is that about?
Yeah. So the way this sort of came about is, when I was 11 years old, all these Jesus people, these hippies from Southern California, sort of invaded my little hometown in Oregon, in their VW vans. And one of these guys, he had trained under Hal Lindsey, the author of The Late Great Planet Earth. It's a Bible prophecy
Okay.
book, sold about 35 million copies at the
Okay.
UCLA Light and Powerhouse Seminary. So he gave me a copy of that book. He led me to the Lord. And so I've always had this fascination of prophecy. So,
Right.
flash forward to 2009, I'm a reporter at the LA Daily News. A guy at church says, "Hey, there's going to be this prophecy conference at Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills, but Pastor Jack Hibbs' church." And so I managed to talk to my editors of the Daily News, let me go cover this. And so it was like 3,000 people there. Tim LaHaye wrote the Left Behind series is there, and Paul McGuire is there. And he's talking. He's a very charismatic speaker, and he says the world is undergoing the greatest transformation since the Tower of Babel, a coming global government, cashless society, and universal religion. And when he said that, I flashed back to late great planet Earth, and I thought, if this is true, this is a gigantic story because I'm an investigative journalist. So I
Right.
introduced myself to him, and he had a book called "The Day the Dollar Died," and he gave me a copy of this. And it's about the Illuminati and secret societies, the end times, and all these sort of fascinating subjects. And I read it, and I thought, yeah, this is quite a deal here, because this is
Mm-hmm.
sort of my first exposure to this. And then he started calling me all the time. He used to be a former nationally syndicated radio show host, and he would call me and say, I think we should write books together, make movies, and help awaken the world to what's going on. But I was resistant. I'm a reporter at the LA Daily News, and I know if I start writing
Right.
about the Illuminati and secret societies, that's going to be the end of my career as a mainstream journalist.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And I actually went through like this Job-like experience where I pretty much lost everything: family,
Uh-huh.
job, home, life savings, the whole shebang. And one day I'm just like, okay, God, whatever you want me to do, I'll do. And so that sort of began this whole, was now turned into like a 15-year journey. And so our first book, The Babylon Code, was sort of the culmination of this, came out in 2015. And it's actually an expose of globalism and
Okay.
the exploration of Mystery Babylon in the book of Revelation. It's considered one of the Bible's greatest mysteries. And so that book, it goes into the secret societies and who's the behind the scenes power brokers and that kind of thing. And this one pastor read it, and he was so inspired by it, he delivered a whole box of the Babylon Codes to the Trump team in early
Okay.
2016. And two
Mm-hmm.
months later, Trump announced Americanism, not globalism, will be his
Okay.
credo as his platform for president. And then, he got nobody thought he'd win, and then he, the Celebrity Apprentice TV reality star gets elected president,
Yeah.
and the bombshell election. And so our agent comes to us and says, "Troy, why don't you guys write a second book looking at how does Trump fit into unfolding end time events?" So then he said, well, "Why don't you call it Trumpocalypse?" And because it was like
Okay.
headlines in the Washington Times and New York Times
Yes.
saying, "Is this the Trumpocalypse?"
Yeah.
And so we wrote that book, sort of exploring how he fits into this. And that was sort of the beginning of this whole journey. Those first two books.
Um, uh, you know what? It's funny, but not funny. But when you, like you said, when you were an investigative reporter, you said, if I report on this, okay, I'm gonna get my pink slip real quick, because this material, Illuminati's, and it was like, yeah, people would watch it, but it was like, like oh, this is from like a James Bond movie in the '60s, Doctor Evil or Spectre or something like that. And it's kind of creepy when you realize, wait, that's not that fictional anymore. Even though it appeared in a television, well, in a movie, it was like how much of, and it's like something that you have to like expand your mind to allow the possibility that this is not fiction. This is possibly, um, because we kind of think that, no, I'm gonna say us normies, nobody pays attention to us, and it's like, yeah, they pay attention to you and manipulate you in the many ways that you're just not aware of because it's so far up the food chain. And now lately, I think that, like I said, people are becoming more aware that there is this type of, that we manipulate in many levels. Whether it's financial, obviously the school systems, everything. Through the entertainment industry, and it's been going on for many years. I think it was just more subtle, or people weren't paying that much attention, I guess, is what I want to say.
I mentioned my ancestor Schiller. So he lived in the late 1700s,
Uh
and at
huh.
the time, almost all his friends were members of the Bavarian Illuminati, including
Okay.
Goethe, the famous German writer. And they don't think that Schiller joined, but there was this actual secret society that existed in Germany at that time.
Right.
And as the story goes, this the founder of the Illuminati had sent this writer to go deliver some documents to somebody. He supposedly got hit by lightning on his journey,
Oh,
And so
dread.
when the government, somebody discovered him, and they were taking his body in for an autopsy, they found these papers
Oh.
sewn into his jacket, and it talked about the plans of the Illuminati, supposedly to, overthrow the governments of Europe and infiltrate the
Uh-huh.
Catholic Church and that kind of stuff. And so the officials at the time became alarmed. Even George Washington wrote some letters, expressing concern about it, and there was all this sort of hubbub. And so this
Right.
was an actual secret society that existed. And one of the things I said was they wanted to create a new world order through revolution. And this was,
Mm-hmm.
around the time of the French Revolution and sort of like
Yes,
that whole
yes.
thing. And so, most people have looked into this and studied this, believe that the Illuminati, organization was, disbanded because the government cracked down on it. But, the speculation is that they sort of went underground, infiltrated Freemasonry, and
Well,
today
that's
are
what I was about to ask you. You hit right on it. I was gonna say I had heard that they kind of like Freemasons were that they've been taken over or infiltrated. So basically, you're saying that yeah, that's what happened, right?
In fact, I don't know if you've ever interviewed or read Jim Marrs books.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, amazing investigative journalist. He used to be at the Fort Worth Star Telegram, and I
Mm-hmm.
read his book "Ruled by Secrecy." I forget, 15 years ago or something like that. And I remember I was a reporter at the LA Daily News at the time. This is sort of like becoming more aware of what was going on. And I went into the editor and I said, hey, check out this book, Ruled by Secrecy. That sort of told a little bit about. And she goes, shh, we don't talk about those kind of things around here. And so,
I
so
bet it was
uh,
like what? Yeah.
and then later on, I got to interview Jim Marrs, and I've read most of his books, and so that's part of the I read hundreds and hundreds of books and interviewed hundreds of people, but he did such a great job of sort of laying out the history of all these behind the scenes power brokers, Illuminati, and
Mm-hmm.
Bilderberg Group, and Skull and Bones, and all these things. And so,
Yes.
yeah, I mean, you just go down the grocery store today, and they've got Time magazine and National Geographic specials on secret societies. So now you can just go down the grocery store and read all about them.
Right. Oh, and sometimes I hate to say it, but now a lot of these sources have been discredited. So like everything they put out, you're like, I wonder how accurate you are. As far as how, I mean, how's this? If they don't out and out lie, they're that omission of the complete story. We'll write this part, but we'll just leave this other part out. So even like you said, sources like National Geographic and Smithsonian and stuff like that, even now sometimes, and I hate to say it, but a lot of people have become kind of cynical about sources that once were like when Walter Cronkite used to talk, everybody be like, yeah, nobody would ever question that any major news outlet would say something partial or untrue, or everybody just thought absolutely that's the truth. And now we're finding out that in a lot of different ways we were being misled, either by out and out lies or not getting the complete story, or how's this, a slanted version of it, even for historical purposes. Sometimes even if you go back through as far as what history is being taught, you find, hey, this is not exactly accurate. um, and this is the thing, you see where George Washington was a Freemason, and a lot of the men that were involved in the forming the country, after the we rebelled against Britain, they were all involved in the Freemasons. And then and it's almost like, but from what you're saying is like there's a before and after. And let me ask you, do you think that what the Illuminati took them over because they said, well, this is the way, because just the way they are, we need to get into all these different societies, or what?
Yes. So Jim Mars, he wrote this book, actually his last book. I interviewed him twice. It was called "The Illuminati: The Secret Society That Hijacked the World." And so he sort of laid out the whole history of the Illuminati, sort of best he could put it together. And what he claimed in that is that they have infiltrated sort of the higher echelons of the Freemasonry, which is the largest secret society in the world. And
Right.
so at the very top, you have a Illuminized Freemasonry, and but for pretty much all the guys, about down below, they don't know about this. They just
Right.
sort of
That's
view it
what
as
I
like sort of like
understand.
a social club or a businessman's club, that kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. But that's just one aspect of this, and so yeah, there's a very there's very interesting things about these different secret societies and sort of quasi secret organizations.
So basically, but the Illuminati, based from what you're saying, is what their ultimate goal is. What globalism, as far as one government over everybody,
Yeah,
not
yeah, that's yeah. So the globalism is a I mean they're open, very open about it now. That they're pushing for this
yeah.
sort of one world system. They have the World Government Summits and the
Mhm.
Bilderberg Group meets, and you've got the now you have the World Economic Forum. Klaus
Yes.
Schwab, shortly after the pandemic erupted, he released a book called The Great Reset, and he called for the Great Reset of capitalism, and
Yes.
they're sort of closely aligned with the United Nations 2030 agenda. That famous video, "You own nothing to be happy," supposedly.
Mhm.
So they're sort of openly pushing for this now, and what I write about in my books is that the Apostle John warned us in Revelation that at some point in history, when only God knows, there will actually be a world government under the Antichrist and false prophet, and it's all described in the book of Revelation. So, could we be getting closer to that? Only God knows. But so my books,
Right.
look at the evidence. Are we approaching this thing the Apostle John warned us of?
Well, I've told my audience, when you've been alive a little while, you remember, and I'm going to go on the financial slant, where you would get a paycheck every week and you would cash it and you would do whatever you wanted, whether deposit into the bank or spend cash. And then they started saying, no, you need to direct. Then there came a point where they said, look, just sign this up and you'll get direct deposited into your account. But you still had a choice. You could get a paper check or get it direct deposited. And then little by little, they kind of like said, no, direct deposit. And and how's this? Even before, it originally started with major corporations, but if you had a smaller mom and pop, you could still get your paycheck. And then little by little, all this thing of where you had autonomy over your money as far as getting cash, that way went. But it took years, is what I'm saying. It took years for this to happen. All right. Because I remember waiting at work. It's like, who's got the paychecks? They would go to the thing and they would have the checks in, their envelopes, and then they would just give them out to everybody. Here's your check. Here's your check. Here's your check. And now you have you don't even have some type of, even if it's one of those even those temporary debit cards, but there's no way you're going to get cash. There's no way. And you go to a lot of entertainment, and what they call cashless venues. You can't, cash is no good. And I'm looking at all of this and I'm like, this is not good. This is not good. You know, everything is being like basic tracked. And there's only one reason that happens, because otherwise, what would you care if somebody pays with a check? I mean, with a cash or with a credit card or whatever. It's very suspect. But yeah, they've been doing this. What I'm saying is, everybody looks at it as sometimes something recent, but this goes back decades. That they've been people pushing them little by little. When you start, you go down the road and you start closing off the lanes, and before you know it, there's just one lane, and that's it. You can't get off. There's no off ramp. And I I think, and they make it, what's the word I'm looking for? They make it's convenient. Hey, don't worry, just convenience. You just use your card, and of course they find out, and it's really funny because who was it that was telling me? I said, well, they said, well, even when you go to these stores, that they have these loyalty programs, that even if you pay with cash but you use your loyalty card, basically they're still being aware of what it is you purchased, from their end as far as their store. And I was like, man, okay, like, let's get paranoid about this, but it makes sense. It's always keeping track of what your habits are, what you're doing, what they've, everybody knows they've done with a lot of these social media outlets, which is scrape information. As far as, even though they say claim it's anonymous, it turns out not to be. And I think that's very, in and of itself, for regular people who say, well, I don't care. And it's like, you should, because at the end of the day, it's like they're putting us in a big giant corral. Now, you also, the Military Guide to Armageddon. What is that about?
So after Trumpocalypse came out,
Mm-hmm.
retired U.S. Army chaplain and Colonel David Giammona, he called me out of the blue, and he said, "I've been working on a book called The Making of a Warrior, but he said, I felt God wanted me to shift focus from, this sort of like the training you go through to become a soldier, shift focus into the end times and how you prepare for the end times. And so at the time, the first two books, it had done very well. But at that time, sort of 2015, 2017, a lot of people hadn't awoken yet. So sort of
Mm-hmm.
uphill push to get this information out. In fact, Paul McGuire and I, my co-author of the Babylon Code and Trumbox, we sort of joked we're going to mainstream conspiracy theories. And but when the colonel called me, I thought to myself, because I knew about these polls, like 70, 80% of Americans highly respect the military. So I thought,
Yeah.
if America and the church will listen to anybody about the dangers we're in, what's really happening, they'll listen to a retired U.S. Army chaplain and colonel. So we teamed up together and wrote our first book together, The Military Guide to Armageddon, which, sort of takes his 3 decades in the military, my time as a journalist, sort of puts that together. And how do you get ready for the end times? What does the Bible say about this? Sort of spiritual preparation. And we wrote 3 books together: The Military Guide to Armageddon, Military Guide to Disarming Deception, how to navigate all the massive deception today. And then the last book just came out in March. It's called Your Mission in God's Army. Sort of, how do you find your purpose, your assignment, your, life calling, God's calling on your life. So we wrote 3 books together.
Okay. And let me ask you, well, military is a whole nother, that's another one that's gone through a big transformation in the United States, at least, where even now I believe they have very severe recruiting deficit as far as, which I don't blame. By the way, my son went into the Navy, and he went in there like 4 years after 9/11, which back then there was still that fear of, a terrorist attack, and he served and he went straight out of high school because he was one of these, when they get this. But if fast forward, if there, I'd wrestle him to the floor and put him in a headlock, and I wouldn't let him go into the military. There's just no way. I'd be like, nope, 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 you're not. It was great for him, by the way. The time he spent there and everything, it did wonders. He learned a lot. He traveled a lot because he was on one of the big naval carriers that was going out to the like the Japan and all these Asiatic countries. But now the way things are, and I guess my point is, in such a short amount of time, there's been such a transformation as far as the military that I'm like, what is going on? And do you think that even what's going on with the military, do you think that's part of will lead to Armageddon as far as what's coming, or wouldn't matter one way or the other?
Um, yeah, I mean, we've seen such transformations in, the military and government and media. I mean, as you mentioned, I mean, this plan has been going on for a long time. One of my books I put that, the United Nations has there's a group called the Lucius Trust that has
Mm-hmm.
consultative status with the United Nations, and they help train people around the world, leaders and that kind of thing. And there's a lady named Alice Bailey who actually wrote some books called about the hierarchy. This is that back in the 1940s, and they're on their website, and it talks about how a world government will be coming online by 2025. And so,
Okay.
we're sort of here now. And so,
Yes.
so I think they've engaged in a long-term plan. They realize that, most nations, most people in the world don't want a world government. They're afraid about, I think about George Orwell's book, 1984, and the,
Mm-hmm.
Big Brother, this Orwellian state, freedom is slavery, and, all those sort of groupthink kind of terms. And now we sort of see this happening today with the cancel culture and the
Yes.
woke phenomena, and it's all the brainwashing, scientific mind control. Think back about Hitler, and he talked about the big lie, and was, managed to deceive the German people, and the, cause World War II and the Holocaust, all the horrible things that happened. But we think about, they've now perfected that kind of propaganda to a level where they can just massively deceive us through, social media and then the media and scientific, brainwashing, and all kinds of techniques that have been perfected now. So you express concerns about the push for digital currency. And, the Bible does talk about this mark of the beast system where you can't buy or sell during the tribulation period. So, once they have digital currency, they can track everything. They can
Yes.
potentially shut off our ability to spend money. And so, for the first time in history, there's actually the possibility of this mark of the beast system with artificial intelligence and digital currencies, electronic banking, the surveillance state, where you could have total control over the world. And so that's the danger, that with this push for these digital currencies and all these surveillance, and the government just gathers massive information on us,
Yes.
and have gigantic data centers that funnel everything in. They can scan it and
Yeah.
that kind of thing. So we are living in George Orwell's 1984.
Now let me. I'm sure you've heard of this. That a story came out not too long ago where Kuwait is going to be withholding, what was it, access to some other. I can't. I think it's their bank accounts if they don't give their biometrics. But I think it's by the end of the year. With their thumbprint, because I guess some people are resistant. But people don't know, and it's almost like, from what I understand, for a while back, Kuwait was actually giving their citizens, were getting a monthly stipend from the government for, I think, I don't know if it was the oil or something that was being produced. So if you were like a natural, like actually born in Kuwait, you were getting a monthly amount. And now they're saying that if you don't give your biometrics by the end of the year, that's it. It's over. So it's like, see, this is when you were Kuwaiti and you're getting all this money. I think it's been a few years. You're thinking this is wonderful, and here it comes. Here comes the bad part of it. What they were doing. What That's is why they did it all along. Because if you're used to living a lifestyle, as a matter of fact, from what I understand, they had they were short on labor, like regular labor, because the regular population was living, didn't have to really work that hard. As far as manual labor, people to like gardeners and all this other stuff. So they were bringing in people to do those menial jobs because your regular population, Kuwait wasn't, they didn't have to. So now they're on the other end of it. Like, what do? You're gonna get what you've been, this wonderful lifestyle that you've been living, unless you give your biometrics. And I think that that's going to be the what do they call it here? The basic income. Oh, I know it has this complete name where they want to turn everybody to give everybody X amount of money every month, and it's like it's the same thing. Once they get you hooked, that first of all, don't aspire to start your own business. Don't aspire, to do what an entrepreneurial kind of idea. They want to squash that and get you used to like getting X amount of money. And if you don't behave like you were saying, or you don't turn over your information, then guess what? They're going to turn off the spigot and leave you high and dry. And you're going to go work and do what? Because that's another thing. And I'm going to mention this real quickly. My son, after he left the Navy, he's a carpenter, and he does a lot of construction. And he'll tell me, "Mom, nobody knows how to do any of this stuff. None of the men, especially. I'm gonna throw the men under the bus." Okay. He says a lot of stuff that once upon a time, and I remember my grandfather, my uncles, they would know how to fix stuff around the house, regular stuff. I'm not talking, you know, they don't know how to do it anymore. There's some that don't want to do it, but they don't know how to do it, and there's some that just don't know how to do it. Very basic things, maintenance stuff around your home. And he tells me, he says, "Mom, I get calls all day, every day for things to get done, like a honey-do list around the house." And he says, "That's my bread and butter." And I guess that's part of how can I say, the prep for what we're talking about down the road, where people are not self-sufficient. How's that? Are not self-sufficient. And I think and I know that sounds like a master plan, and I think that, yeah, I know that sounds like a little bit like, oh, that's so, that's so conspiratorial, but I think so when you look at it in the broad terms, or when in hindsight. Do you think that, well, one of the things, yeah, I did want to ask you about, because this is the one that This last book that you released, Troy, which is the Trump Code. You're saying that there's something about time travel in that book. What is it that you found or that you wrote about the time
Yeah,
travel aspect?
yeah. So the Trump code sort of puts together this 5,000 piece jigsaw puzzle of, how does Trump fit into these unfolding end time events and what's happening,
Mm-hmm.
what's the future of America. So one thing we look at is called the Ingersoll Lockwood novels. He's this author and lawyer, lived in the late 1800s. Abraham Lincoln actually gave him an appointment as consular general to Hanover, Germany. And it's sort of the time of the popular Alice in Wonderland novels. And so he wrote this series
Okay.
of books called the Baron Trump Collection. It's at the Library of Congress, came out in the
Okay.
1890s. And the drawing of the boy on the cover of the book, Baron Trump, looks strikingly like Baron Trump's son, Baron. And
Okay.
in these novels, he's guided by Don Frum, the great master of all masters, and they go on time traveling adventures. These are children's
Okay.
fantasy novels. And he lives on Castle Trump on Fifth Avenue in New York City, where Trump Tower now stands 130 years later. And
Wow.
there's been stories in Newsweek and the Daily Mail and the Politico, talking about this. And there's been videos on YouTube and TikTok that got millions of views. And what's really intrigued people is the final book in the series is called The Last President. And in this book, it says that the anarchists and the socialists converge on Castle Trump following the election of a populist president. And they're chanting death to the rich man. And then he's elected, civil war breaks out, the military's called in, and all kinds of chaos, which is sort of what people expect with this upcoming election.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
did he foresee, Trump getting reelected
I
here?
tell you something.
Did
That's pretty accurate. That's and I had heard something about that. And let me ask you, did he ever obviously he wrote it as a fiction, but did he ever say anything as to what he inspired him or where he got the idea or anything way back whenever he wrote it?
Yeah, I did as much research as I could dig up about him. There's just not much about him. There's an
Okay.
op-ed in the, I think it's in one of the New York newspapers talking about he was a somewhat prominent attorney, but we really couldn't find too much out about him.
Right.
And so maybe it's sort of like George Orwell's 1984 started to come true, and
Mm,
or Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, the book burnings, and now we got all the censorship, or
yes.
Aldous Huxley's Brave New World dystopian future. Maybe it's sort of that way. There seems to be something mysterious about writing. You've got all the biblical prophets. About 2,000 in the Bible is 2,500 prophecies have all come true now. And so can God show other people, fictional writers, the future? That's something we
Okay.
explore in the Trump Code.
Right. Right. Even though they might not understand how they're being inspired, do you think that's possible? Even if they think it's their imagination?
Yeah, I think the Bible talks about God speaking to people through dreams and visions and
Mm-hmm.
showing people the future. How exactly does He do that? There's that curious story about the Mount of Transfiguration. So Jesus is there, he's shining with the glory of God, and then Moses and Elijah appear with him. And Moses is shining with the glory of God, and so is Elijah. Now, if you think back to the story of Moses in the Bible, when he went up on the Sinai to get the Ten Commandments, he encountered God, and when he came back down, he's shining with the glory of God. In fact, he's shining so much that they had to put a veil over his face because he's too bright. And the same
Okay.
thing happened with Elijah. And so, did Jesus bring them from the past to the Mount of Transfiguration? Did he sort of time travel them? And so there's a
Okay.
number of stories in the Bible that are sort of like that. So how does God show people the future? Is it possible? Nostradamus. There's all kinds of intriguing figures throughout history that seeing the future. So that's one aspect we delve into, but we also delve into another this actual time travel aspect in the book, and that's pretty interesting too.
Well, you know what? Because you read, for example, Nostradamus with those quatrains, and it's like, what? I'm saying in comparison, let's say, to what this gentleman wrote as far as Baron Trump. I mean, this is like names. This is like very direct. Because I've read some of the quatrains, and I'm like, I know some of them is like, but the this and the that. It's like, okay, I could interpret it this way, but I couldn't. Sometimes I don't know. That's my. There's sometimes some of these they're a little bit like ambiguous. Could it be that? Oh, could be that this other thing. And I understand that in the times that he wrote these predictions, he had to camouflage his writings because of the time period that it was, as far as being secular and or anti, you were going against the church if they perceived it that way. How's that? So I understand that sometimes that's why they wrote weirdly. How's that? Versus, let me ask you, have you come across any other how can I say it, whether it's a writer or anybody, because everybody's heard of Nostradamus, that you've discovered like, wow, this is some person that really was not known, and they have written information that is right, is very, very on the money about what's going to happen or what has happened. That's not a well recognized figure. How's that?
Um, well, I mean, there are, what are sort of considered modern day prophets
Mm-hmm.
that exist today, and we actually I quote from some of them that I believe are somewhat accurate. Of course, in the Bible, if the prophet predicted something didn't come true, the command was to stone him to death. So, but that
You
that's
better
in
be
the
right.
Bible. So I never called myself a prophet, and I wouldn't want to, but the
Uh-huh.
Bible does talk about the prophetic gift and different gifts that God gives us, and so I believe we're all endowed with different kind of gifts that are
Mm-hmm.
supernatural in nature. And so that
Right.
there are some people that, there's one guy, he's got a YouTube show, and he talked about, this is before it happened, seeing President Trump getting shot in the ear. And this is a
Yes, I
few
saw
months,
that.
yeah.
I was like,
And there's
incredible.
another guy, Joseph Z. He talked about the shot heard around the world. That was well before this happened. And there's another
Mm-hmm.
guy. So we included some of that in the book. I mean, how do they see these things? Is it dreams or sort of like waking
Let me
visions,
ask
that
you
kind of
something.
stuff?
That gentleman that saw that Trump was hit through the ear, of all things, the ear. Did he? What was he dreaming? Was it a lucid dream? How did he just do? How did? Because I've heard him, but I've never heard exactly how it came to him. Was it like a dream when you're sleeping, a lucid dream, or how did that come to him?
My wife showed me that video a few times, and I forget exactly what he said and how
Mm-hmm.
how it came to him. Like my first co-author, Paul McGuire, we actually detailed a vision that he had, like a waking vision in our first
Okay.
book, The Babylon Code, and he described like this. He and his wife were praying. I think they were in New York celebrating their 40th anniversary or something like that. And all of a sudden, he started feeling like this really intense heat filling his entire body. And he said he felt like he was on fire. And then he said he felt like that God took him up to like a 30,000 foot level where he could sort of see the country. And then he
Okay.
started seeing these little flickers of light getting brighter and brighter. And it spread from the west coast to the east coast. And what he believed God told him was that if the church would truly repent and turn from our wicked ways, we could
Mm-hmm.
see this revival begin in the west coast of America and travel across the country and then around the world. But it was dependent on Christians
Right.
repenting, truly repenting, humbling themselves, and turning from our wicked ways. And so that's actually been the theme of all my books, is
Mm-hmm.
what we call the Nineveh moment. I did an interview with Billy Graham in 2013, and he said when God sent the prophet Jonah to Nineveh to warn them of judgment, the king and the people repented, and he believed the same thing can happen again this time in America. And so we included Billy Graham's interview in the Babylon Code, and then in Tropocalypse, we actually called for a National Day of Repentance. A friend of ours ran with it. He persuaded Rabbi Jonathan Cahn to be the spokesman, and this
Okay.
event actually happened. It was called The Return. It was on the National Mall. 250,000 people showed up. 42 million people watched this. And then flash forward to April 8th of this year, we had the Great North American Eclipse, and it went through all these towns called Nineveh. And
Yes, exactly. It did.
so I wrote this story for Charisma, where I used to be editor. Is this our Nineveh moment, our chance to turn back to God? Can we see this big turnaround? Can we see this revival grow? So I believe God sort of put the ball in our court. And so that's the theme of the Trump Code. This is our Nineveh moment, or this critical point in history, and the choice we make will determine which path we take here.
What do you think about, and I'm here with Christians who say, I'm not going to participate in any political thing. Like they just they want to stay apart from that. Do you think that's wise?
Yeah, I think the Barna, George Barna came out with that survey about a week ago,
Mm-hmm.
and said that over 100 million Christians are unlikely to vote in this election.
Right.
And in each election, there's always a large number of Christians that don't vote. And I think what it is the church, the pastors, they no longer, very few of them still talk about politics, the importance of voting, our civic
Right.
duties, what's really going on. They don't tell the congregation they don't talk about the kind of things we're talking about here. And so, many Christians are just unaware of what's really happening. And the media is, massive deception propaganda machine. And so that's the danger. Like I remember Franklin Graham, he'd come here to California and hold these like outdoor rallies and encourage Christians to go vote, because he knew if we could just get
Mm-hmm.
a few more million Christians in California to vote, California could actually be a Republican state again. Because
Sure. Yeah.
there's I think there's 8 million evangelicals here in California, but only like a third vote. And it's more than 38 states combined or something like that. And so it's the same thing across the country. There's all these Christians. If they just went and voted a few, like maybe 5 million
Right.
more, President Trump would be, he would definitely win.
Well, I mean, let's face it. Even and part of me understands the reasoning sometimes behind wanting to withdraw from that, but I'm gonna when this thing with COVID, where they weren't allowing people to go to celebrate, whether it was mass or go to your to whatever your religious affiliation was, you couldn't go and celebrate. Go to church. All right, and I guess my point is that even for some, leaders or pastors or anybody that's saying we're going to stay apart from that, but when you don't participate, laws are enacted or statutes that do affect, as in what happened. It's not like you can say, well, I'm not going to get involved with it and they'll leave us alone. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. That it's somehow or other, because I remember, if somebody would have told me back in early 2020 with some of the things that would take place, I'd be like, no. What do you mean? The only places that are going to be left open are going to be Walmart and liquor stores? No. I would never have believed that. And look what came to pass, and all the other stuff that came with it, of course. And that's when I became aware that different types of churches, different denominations were basically like, we're going to stay apart from that or anything having else. And even now, well, significantly, this thing with the vote, which is pivotal. I'm like, I don't know, but this is something that is like, you might not like it, you might feel uncomfortable, or you think, but I think so much is writing on what's going to happen within what, less than a month, that yeah, we would need every vote. Everybody's like, if you want to be able in, how's this, I can see down the road at the rate we're going that there would be more persecution of Christians. I think that that would happen down the road. I know people don't want to believe that because, especially in the United States, we've always supposedly it's freedom of religion, which is great. But you have to be blind not to see that Christians worldwide, not even in the United States, are being persecuted. And I think that would ramp up. I think that would ramp up. So I was this like sticking your head in the sand. I don't think is going to be a solution. On the contrary, I think to myself, can you imagine down the road Christians have to meet in secret? Like, oh, let's, so, yeah, we're gonna meet at so and so's house, at this time, and make sure, like, shh. And I know somebody would think, well, that's great imagination, Marlene. It's like, I wish it was just an imagination kind of scenario, but yes, and people don't understand that globalism is very anti-religion. All right, my background is or my family. Well, I was born in the United States. Are Cuban, so they understand what communism is. The only religion they believe is you will believe in the leader, whoever the leader is. That's why they put these big posters of these guys all over the place, and they will. And by the way, they'll start with Christianity, but eventually they'll work their way over to other religions. But the first ones that are going to take the fall are going to be the Christians of different denominations. Guaranteed. They will. They will. I've lived it. I've heard enough stories. I wasn't alive and but I heard stories even when I was a little kid. It's growing up. This is one thing that I was taught from the cradle was that. Um, and yes, there is no middle ground. There is no middle ground with that. They will anything that has to do with spirituality, um, a connection with anything that is they don't they want to, and what they'll do is what they're doing now is that once your child goes to school, they're taught, this is the supreme leader, blah blah blah, and everything else is false. Houses of worship will be closed down, and that's what I'm saying. And then, you'll have the ones that have to meet in secret, and that is the reality of where we might be heading if we're like on the edge of the. At least this is what I think, what I believe. We're at like on the edge of the precipice if we don't like pull back, to and how's this, not like hope only. Like we really have to become engaged in all facets, as far as whether it's prayer or what you do, because at the end of the day, really what counts is what do you do. You could think and hope, oh, but it's like what do you do, actually do, um to counteract to and I know I don't know, Troy, do you agree that some people have boiled this down to um a conflict between good and evil? Do you think it's that, or is it just a political thing, a political arena?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the Bible tells us there's a great spiritual battle going on in the background, a battle between good and evil, and
Mm-hmm.
it's playing out in our world. And so, I agree with everything you just said. We could experience real persecution, beginning with
Yes.
Christians, essentially, if the Democrats are put back into power here. Because essentially the Democrats are closely aligned with the World Economic Forum's Great Reset Plan, the United Nations Agenda 2030. It's all detailed what they plan to do on their websites, and there's numerous articles and books out there to talk about this. All my books talk about this.
Mm-hmm.
President Trump, he's trying to maintain the Judeo-Christian foundations of our nation, the freedoms we've long enjoyed, our sovereign borders. We're having this massive invasion of our
Oh
country.
boy.
All these criminals coming in, they're
Yes.
allowing this because these could become Democratic voters and can
Yes, of course.
destabilize the country. So they're very conservative. And the inflation, our rents are all up 30, 40%,
Yes.
cost of food, gas. These are the policies that the Democrats have implemented that have resulted. They're trying to merge America into this new global system, and
Yes.
ultimately they don't want all these free thinking Christians, causing them
Yes.
trouble. And
Mm-hmm.
so we are at a pivotal moment in history. If we choose the Democrats, we could see this acceleration toward this great reset plan, more persecution, more oppression. I mean, we've sort of got a taste of what a totalitarian state is like during the pandemic. They closed down all the churches,
Yeah.
and we all had to stay in our homes.
Yeah.
And so we got like a little
Didn't
taste there.
they had even some they even ticketed, I mean, some pastors that opened that well, there was one there, I think he was preach they stay in your cars and but come to the parking lot. I mean, but some of them that tried to basically um communicate with their with whoever belonged to the church, they got in trouble for it. Or I was like, what is this? you know that's that and it didn't make sense. I think I can't I think was it in Florida where he basically had them like just sit in your car and I'll preach, and that way so that people wouldn't feel isolated, and he got in trouble for it. I can't remember exactly what it was. And I remember reading that story and it was like, that's just incredible. This is incredible. And things like this, and I'm going to give you a short story because I think we've kind of seen it right before Fidel took over Cuba, which, by the way, my grandfather had been a police officer for many years, and he had retired. He had just retired, and he came over to Miami, and but he still kept in touch those first few years after they took over the island. So he at one time he was what they call a beat cop, where he had his area, and so he says I knew everybody. He says I knew the guy that was the petty thief. I knew the guy that was the delinquent. I knew everybody. I knew who everybody was in that area, and they knew me. And as a matter of fact, sometimes they'd even ask me for like, "Hey, can you give me a buck for a cigarette?" Stuff like that. He says a couple of years later, he still had some people over there, and they said, "Hey, you know who they made?" He was at a part of Havana called El Cerro. That he goes, "You know who they made the chief of police over here?" And he's like, "Who?" He goes, "Some guy's name." He goes, "I remember I was a little kid." And he goes, "This guy was the biggest thief, the biggest delinquent. And they made him the chief of police." And I now sometimes I see stuff and it's like, I remember that story he told me. As absurd as it sounds, that is kind of what we would be looking at down the road if I want to put it bluntly, if Trump doesn't become president. That is what's going to happen. That's where we're heading to, where the world goes topsy turvy. And yeah, yeah, and I'm sure you might have seen it from different nationalities in America, Troy, that had experienced some type of communism or socialism. Is like, okay, let's call it what it's coming. Whether they're Cubans or Vietnamese or people that would belong to the USSR, anybody that suffered under that type of government are now like, they're like, what are you doing? Are you guys crazy? Do you understand what you're doing, what you're letting allow? And I know that, I get it. And as far as what you were talking about, as far as what they're doing with the border, um, this, even back in, because everybody thinks that this thing with the is recent. Um, there was and I'm not gonna. One time I did a job where I did some investigations, and we had a gentleman who was here from Honduras, and he ended up being arrested. He was illegally here. He ended up getting arrested for raping his wife. Blah 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 blah. They also put an ICE hold on him. This was, I want to say, like in 2011. We're talking a few years back, and ICE never came to pick him up. The local police department had arrested him, but they were saying, okay, if he's going to be sent back, he's going to be deported, then we're like not going to proceed with these charges against him. Plus, it was difficult because his wife also. I'm sorry, they were not from Honduras. They were from Guatemala. They're a type of. They're called the Mam Indians. They're even illiterate in Spanish, so they were going to have a problem as far as prosecuting him with. His wife was illiterate, and she was like afterwards saying no, he didn't, whatever. So everybody's thinking, okay, ICE, come get him and send him. Never happened. All of a sudden, I got a phone call and they said, we need to do this and this because this man is going to be released. And I had to go and run around some other things having to do with that case. But my point being that we think that these problems with, as far as the immigration is just now it's because they're surging, but the way that things have been treated, or what happens to people that should at least be returned for criminal activity back to their country of origin, that hasn't been happening for a lot of years. A lot of years. And it's unfortunate because only a very small percentage of people that are been working in the field have actually seen it and are looking at this and going, yeah, this is not new. This is not new. It's just that now the numbers are overwhelming. But yeah, and so I totally agree with a lot of what you're saying. And how's this? You know, a lot of the things, as far as in the Bible and Armageddon, and do you think that a lot of what's written is inevitable? Like there's just no way it's going to be avoided, or is there something as far as what we do or don't do that
Yes.
could? What do you think?
Yes, so I think that's the message that Billy Graham tried to relate to me, and the
Uh-huh.
story in Nineveh. So everybody knows Jonah and the whale. So
Mm-hmm.
God sends the prophet Jonah to Nineveh to warn them of judgment, but he runs the other way. He doesn't want to go to Nineveh because they're known as this very brutal, vicious city, And
Right.
so then ultimately, God has this giant fish. He gets he flees the other way on a boat, and a big storm comes, and he ends up having to tell all the sailors that he's fleeing from God's call. So he tells them, just throw me overboard, and then he's swallowed by this gigantic fish. And he's 3 days in the belly of the whale, and he actually gets spit up on the shores of Nineveh. And he must have, I mean, who knows how you could possibly survive 3 days in the stomach of a giant fish or a whale. And so he goes in there and tells them 40 days and Nineveh will be overthrown. And then that they took it seriously. I guess it was at the cliffs, maybe around the same time. And the king actually repented, and all the people. And then God spared Nineveh. He didn't judge him. It's the only example in the Bible of God sparing a country intended to judge. And so
Right.
that's the story Billy Graham told me. So I think what it means is that we have an opportunity here. And actually, me and some other my co-authors and different faith leaders, Charisma Media has joined in, His Glory TV, some other media outlets, Frank Speech. We're calling for 40 days of prayer, fasting, and repentance, because this is the solution in the Bible, from
Okay.
September 26th to November 5th, Election Day. And it's
Okay.
catching on. There's people all across the country joining us. We're putting out daily newsletters. We got a revelationwatchers.com newsletter,
Okay.
prophecyinvestigators.com. And so we're encouraging people to do this, and it's sort of taking off. And so I think if enough people wake up and go vote here, because you're talking about why is over 100 million Christians unlikely to vote? I think a lot of it's because of the media. The media tells us all these terrible stories about President Trump, and
Mm-hmm.
people don't know what to believe. But every time you have an election, it's always a choice between the lesser of two evils.
Yes,
And
you're
you
right.
just you shouldn't look at the personalities. You should look at the policies they're going to implement. And
Yes.
that's the danger here, is that the Democrats are probably going to implement these policies that could lead to more persecution, lead to more oppression, lead to this great reset plan. I mean, ultimately, it could lead to the tribulation period. And the book of Revelation talks about this terrible 7-year period under this global dictator called the Antichrist. And essentially it says that about 2/3 of the world population will die in various natural disasters, God's judgments, war, disease, all kinds of terrible things, famine. So I think God's put the ball in our court. We have this opportunity to
Yes.
turn back to him, and he'll probably intervene and stop this from happening. And then who knows? I just don't want to see it happen on my watch. And for
That's
my kids and our
yes,
grandkids.
exactly.
And so that's why I wrote all these books and did all this, is to try to wake up the world. And so I'm actually hopeful that we are going to see a positive thing happen here on November
Yes.
5th. But I think that was Billy Graham's message to me, that God's put the ball in our court, and he's rooting for us. He loves us, and he wants us to do the right thing. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's the message.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, like I said, I think that now is a time for action. You can't be sitting on the sidelines and hope. Oh, I hope this turns out good. It's like, nope. You're gonna have to do a little bit more than you have to actually put yourself in, execute, do something, whatever you have the capability of doing. Or there's some people that sometimes think, I'm nobody. I won't make a difference. What could I do? I'm just one person. And like, you'd be surprised, if there wasn't if you're if there wasn't a fear of what our potential is, they wouldn't bother to try to corral us and make us think a certain way. They just like, yeah, whatever. It doesn't matter. Which, by the way, eventually is where we're going to go. That's where they're going. Whether we did prove or disprove, it won't matter. Right now, we still have some type of say so. How's this? You know, in the political arena, but it's fading fast unless we do something. But yes, absolutely. Troy, thank you for being here tonight. Let me ask you, for my podcast listeners, what is your website so that they can visit your website?
Yeah, it's troyanderson.us. All the
Mm-hmm.
books are on there, and the links to the newsletters, and all kinds of great articles and videos.
Okay. And you mentioned that the 40 days started when, September 26th?
Yeah, and it
Okay.
goes through November 5th. So I think we're on day 22 or something like that.
Okay. Okay. All right. Again, thank you so much. It has been wonderful to speak to you. Do you have, I mean, I know you just released a book, but are you going to release some more books or anything else in the future?
Oh, we have a company called Inspired Literary Group, and we help various people write and edit books, connect them to literary agents and publishers. So we actually got a whole bunch of different projects in different
Oh,
stages,
okay.
and we're working to turn the Trump code into a film if he's reelected. And my
Okay.
last book of Pastor Paul Begley, Revelation 9:11, also looking to turn that into a film or TV series. So yeah, all kinds of
Excellent.
exciting things coming.
Excellent. Yes, absolutely. I wish you the best of luck. And it was wonderful to speak to you. Thank you so, so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye bye. You know what? When he was talking about, a lot of people don't want to look at it that way. They just think it's, you know, let's face it, I've been voting since I was 18 years old. I think about the only times I didn't vote, I was in childbirth or very close to it. In other words, it's like, but outside of that, if I was, I voted. Um, and how's this? I remember one time I was in my 20s and there was this one DJ on a radio station. This is when people would actually listen more to the radio station. And he was this guy. He was like a hippie kind of guy. He was nice. He was, and he goes, well, I'm not going to vote because it doesn't make a difference. And I was like, what is he saying? How could he be saying that? People listen to him and there's going to be other people, of course. And you know what? Now I think back, I'm thinking, oh my God, I can't believe this DJ might have been right. Like, does our vote really, in some instances, not have mattered? Because it's like you're, for lack of a better word, you're innocent. You absolutely believe, my vote counts. It's your civil duty to vote, or that if you want to like have, whether you're in disagreement, and this is always the way I thought of it. If somebody is elected that you don't agree with them, um, you still have to respect the office and then wait until the next cycle comes about to vote somebody that you like better, or whatever the case might be. But like I said, I think so many people, myself included, regardless of your age, have been blackpilled in these last, what, 5 years, 4 years. And because it's like, a lot of this, how's this, this idea, this presentation that you have of the way of the workings of the government and all this stuff is like, man, this is, let's face it, everybody knows, yeah, there's politics, there's always been a flavor of corruption and things like that. But you always saw it as like, you know what, whoever's doing something wrong is going to be exposed and they're going to have to either get prosecuted or they have voted out. And, it's like a scandal and, this is not tolerated. And it's like, oh, Marlene, you're, you're living, you're like, you feel stupid sometimes because you really believe that this was how's this, that the person doing something wrong or but whether taking bribes or anything, misusing their political office. These were the outliers. This was not a common thing, and if you were ever caught, you were sanctioned, whatever. That's it. But that was not the majority. And now come to think, everybody, all this stuff is coming out. It's like, man, what is this? And also that there's a lot of people that go into, you always think of political, also this political office. You're there to serve your constituents, whatever your office is, whether it's local, state, federal, whatever. And you find out so many people are just there. The last thing they do is serve their constituents. They're there like to make money, or in some cases now you see, depending, especially higher offices, is like, basically preparing the way to maybe jump into like a very lucrative position in some big corporation. And in the meantime, it just so happens that they were overseeing maybe committees or laws that could affect their future employers. In other words, they were put there. And I was like, man, this sounds like something like that you would look at one of these government spy thriller novels, and you come to find out, what is this? What is this? And let's not even go into the judicial system, shall we? That's another thing where, you always thought of, I mean, I've been in court settings before, and I know that certain judges are peculiar, eccentric, and some are known to be cranky, or so and so. I mean, we had a judge that I would look at the attorneys that were there during the day, and it'd be like, "Did she take her meds today?" I know you're laughing, but believe it or not, that we knew what kind of day, I had to be in their court, on something. And it was like, I'd look at them and they'd look at me and she goes, "No, everything's good. No, I don't think she took her meds." It's like, oh my God. Yeah. But at the end of the day, that stuff is like, okay, whatever. She's just a cranky judge, or, that day she's being like, "Rah." But, but now you see even the judges is like, what is this? You're supposed to be impartial. You're supposed to be interpreting the law, make sure that everything is done the right way. And what are you doing? Or not? What, you sell yourself out. You're not being impartial, or even attempting to be impartial. And a lot of the stuff now is like, and this is the kind of stuff, I hate to say it, like a lot of these things that once that innocence is stripped away from you, it's you can't unsee it. That's why I'm what I was saying to Troy, and I'm not gonna. It's across the board. So many, um, whether it's government, uh, even religious, uh, judicial, entertainment now, because entertainment is like they've always they've always been scandalous and whatever. Uh, but you always held them like to a standard, like, oh no, this person does this, or this person, even medical, the so and so, they're a doctor, no, they should know. All these bastions of all-knowing respectability, whatever. Blah, blah, blah. It's like, oh, be quiet. You don't know what you're talking about. Or, hey, you've been dispensing that advice or that practice or what, not because it's the right or correct thing. It's because you were lining your own pocket. Don't get me wrong. I have nothing against making money. I'm a capitalist. But it's like, wait, doesn't how's this, your sense of fair play, of what's right? You mean you can't do that and make money at the same time? Like, that's, how's this? It's not even in that sense. How's this? Even in the sense of something besides the legality of it, even if you're not breaking a law, whatever, or are, the ethics of it, the morality of it, like what ethics and morals don't count anymore. Like, that thing, like, hey, when you go to sleep, your conscience doesn't bug you, doesn't bother you. And it's almost like, no, if you want to make money, you have to let go of your morality, your ethics, your conscience. It's like an either or kind of thing. You can't have both. And I was like, I'd be in trouble. I guess I'm just to be poor the rest of my life. Because honestly, I and I think the majority of, oh no, let me take that back. I thought of the majority of people are like that. And again, getting back to the thing about that, you think there's certain people that hold certain positions, or that they thought like that, and it's like, no, sometimes, as a matter of fact, sometimes it's not even that they don't, or they're indifferent, they actively go against the principles of what, for example, let's say the doctors that you say, well, they take an oath, the Hippocratic oath to, like, health wise, help somebody, or, they're not supposed to go like, hey, on purpose I'm gonna, and it's like, no. You see all these doctors, sometimes they sell out to these big pharmas, or dispense certain drugs because they're getting a payback, versus if they realize, man, that drug is not really that good, or I have direct feedback from my patients that it's not that great, and case in point, then you'll see 10 years later, they withdraw these medicines from the market, because now they realize that they have these bunch of side effects, especially after people have taken them for a while. And it's like, yeah, let me tell you, it's a lot of stuff that's going on that, and I think that's why I even asked him about, and it's true that just came out about a large amount of Christians that were just not going to vote, period. They were just not going to vote. And I'm thinking to myself, this has nothing to do whether you want to see it with religion or not religion, but let me tell you, you have to be blind not to see the writing on the wall about the one of the main tenets of the United States has always been freedom of religion. And that's not going to exist. That's what I'm afraid of. That is not going to exist. All right? And people think, wow, Marlene, that's way out there. And I was like, no, it's not. No, it's not. No, it's not. Just go back 4 years, 3 years. No, it's not. And that was like a light version, like a trial run light version. All right. People think that certain things. I told them when all these things happened. Don't get me wrong. I understand that sometimes certain things need to be done. Like you need to help, and I think that's what happened when they said, "Hey, we've got this unknown illness coming through, and we don't know what's causing it or the transmission in 2020." And everybody's like, "Okay, well," everybody's like wigged out. And all of a sudden, they start putting these weird, yeah, we're gonna leave giant stores open and liquor stores open, but we're gonna shut down all the houses of worship, all the mom and pop stores. And I was like, okay, so what? You mean this disease, this illness, whatever, this virus? It's if you go to, as a matter of fact, this big box store where everybody congregates, it's not going to transmit there. And in a liquor store, what? What? You know, stuff like that. It was like this is not science. This is not science. It's not. So yeah, here we go. This is my my impeach. Hold on a minute. Hold on a minute, Andy. Yes, this is my son, the one that has the impeccable timing. I see we have a psychic connection, him and me. This is my Navy boy, that he knows when I'm doing a show, so he calls me. Okay, so I'm gonna let you guys go. Don't forget to sign up to my newsletter on Substack and all the other stuff. Go to Miami Ghost Chronicles, mppelliser.com, blah 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 blah. I got a lot of good guests coming on. Let's see what happens. It's gonna be an interesting end of this year. I'll tell you that much. In the very interesting 2025. So till next time, guys. Take care. Okay.